"This is a prestigious event, sir, not a charity auction." The words cut through the elegant murmur of Beverly Hills' finest like a rusted blade. The elderly man in his pressed but worn military jacket stood motionless, his weathered hands still clutching an envelope of carefully saved bills. Around him, designer suits and couture dresses shifted uncomfortably, crystal champagne glasses tinkling in manicured hands. At the front of the room, a gleaming 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air waited silently, its chrome surfaces reflecting the scene like a mirror from the past. The auction house's grand hall dripped with old money and new arrogance. Rare classics lined the walls like trophies, each wearing price tags that could buy small houses. Among the crowd of tech billionaires and entertainment moguls, the veteran stood out like a broken headlight. In the third row, a figure in a black motorcycle jacket watched intently, dark eyes moving between the old soldier and the Chevy that had brought him here. Nobody recognized Keanu Reeves yet. They were too busy pretending not to notice the disruption. "The bidding will start at $175,000, the auctioneer announced, his cultured voice carrying a hint of dismissal. The veteran's shoulders slumped. The envelope in his hands couldn't hold even a tenth of that. A loud laugh erupted from a man in an Italian suit, his gold watch flashing. "Maybe we should start a GoFundMe." More laughter rippled through the crowd. That's when the figure in the motorcycle jacket slowly stood up, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The silence that followed seemed to pulse with the veteran's heartbeat. His fingers traced the edge of the envelope, each bill inside representing months of careful saving, years of holding on to a dream that now felt like smoke slipping through his fingers. The Bel Air gleamed under the auction house lights, its turquoise and white paint job still perfect after all these years. For a moment he was 22 again, driving down Main Street with Mary in the passenger seat, her scarf dancing in the summer wind. The car had been more than transportation. It was the chariot that carried them through the first years of their marriage, before the war, before everything changed. The auctioneer cleared his throat and practiced sound of polite dismissal. "Now, if we could proceed with serious bidders only." His words hung in the air like expensive perfume, meant to mask something unpleasant. A few titters of laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind of sound that expensive private schools teach and country clubs perfect. The man in the Italian suit stepped forward, his movement drawing attention like a peacock spreading its feathers. "Listen, old-timer," he said, voice dripping with fake sympathy that fooled no one. "This is a collector's piece, museum quality. Each car in this auction is worth more than most people's homes." He gestured expansively at the row of classics. "These aren't just cars, they're investments, art pieces, status symbols. They belong with people who can properly appreciate their value." The veteran's spine straightened, years of military bearing breaking through his defeated posture. "I appreciate its value more than anyone here," he said quietly, but his voice carried. "I drove this exact car through 3 states to get to Mary when she was sick, proposed to her in the front seat, brought our first child home from the hospital in it, sold it only because duty called." His voice cracked slightly. "Every scratch, every ding, every mile, I was there for all of them." The figure in the motorcycle jacket had moved closer now, silent as a shadow. A few people were beginning to recognize him, whispers spreading like ripples in still water. Keanu Reeves stood at the edge of the crowd, his presence creating a subtle gravity that drew eyes away from the spectacle at the center. His expression was unreadable, but his attention never wavered from the unfolding scene. The Italian suit wasn't finished. "That's a lovely story," he said, voice hardening. "Really touching, but this isn't Antiques Roadshow. We're not here to trade in memories." He turned to the crowd, playing to his audience. "This is about preservation, investment, appreciation of fine automobiles. These cars deserve to be in collections, not used as daily drivers by people who can't even afford the registration fees. More laughter, harder this time, with an edge of cruelty. The veteran's hands tightened on his envelope, knuckles white with suppressed emotion. The auctioneer raised his gavel, ready to begin the bidding. That's when Keanu stepped forward, and his quiet voice cut through the noise like a knife through silk. "I've always found it interesting." Keanu's voice was soft, but carried an undercurrent of steel, how people define value. The crowd parted around him like water, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. He moved with the deliberate grace that millions had seen on screen, but this wasn't John Wick or Neo. This was something more real, more raw. The Italian suit faltered, recognition dawning in his eyes. The auctioneer's gavel remained suspended, forgotten in midair. Keanu walked to the Bel Air, running his fingers along its chrome trim with the reverence of someone who understood machines as more than status symbols. "You know, I've been collecting motorcycles for years," he continued, turning to face the crowd. "And the ones that mean the most to me aren't the most expensive or the most pristine. They're the ones with stories, the ones that have lived." He gestured to the veteran. "This gentleman isn't offering money for a car. He's trying to buy back a piece of his life." The veteran stood straighter, dignity returning to his bearing as Keanu spoke. The actor moved to stand beside him, a simple act of solidarity that spoke volumes. The Italian suit tried to recover, his expensive smile turning brittle. "Mr. Reeves, while we're all fans of your work, this is a serious auction. The starting bid reflects the car's market value, its historical significance." Historical significance? Keanu's interruption was gentle, but firm. "I'm looking at its history right now." He turned to the veteran. "Sir, would you mind sharing your name and when you owned this car?" "James Mitchell, Sergeant First Class, retired," the veteran replied, his voice stronger now. "I bought her new in '57, right before shipping out, had to sell in '67 when I got called up again." His eyes never left the car. "She had a small dent in the rear quarter panel. Mary, my wife, bumped a fence post the day we brought our daughter home from the hospital. I never fixed it because every time I saw it, I remembered how happy we were that day." The auctioneer cleared his throat. "The vehicle has been fully restored to original factory condition." "And that's exactly the problem, isn't it?" Keanu's words cut through the pretense like a blade. "You erased its story, its life." The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The wealthy crowd who moments ago had been amused by the veteran's presence now seemed unsure of their footing. A few phones had emerged, recording the scene discreetly. The Italian suit's face had taken on the tight expression of someone who suddenly realized they were on the wrong side of a viral moment. Keanu placed a hand on Sergeant Mitchell's shoulder. "How much did you bring today, if you don't mind me asking?" Mitchell opened his envelope with steady hands. $17,832, every penny I could save over the last 5 years. He straightened his shoulders. "I know it's not enough. I had to try." The actor nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then he turned to face the crowd, and there was something in his expression that made even the wealthiest bidders take notice. It wasn't anger or judgment. It was disappointment, the kind that cut deeper than any rage. "I'd like to make an opening bid," Keanu announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. $175,000. He paused, letting the number hang in the air. "With one condition." His eyes swept the crowd, meeting each gaze in turn. "The car stays with its real owner. Sometimes the true value of things can't be measured in dollars." The Italian suit stepped forward, mouth opening to object, but the look Keanu gave him made the words die in his throat. The room held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence in the auction house took on a physical weight. Sergeant Mitchell stared at Keanu, his weathered face a canvas of conflicting emotions. The actor's offer hung in the air like a challenge to everyone present, not just to their wallets, but to their values. "I can't accept that kind of charity," Mitchell finally said, his voice rough with pride and gratitude. "It's too much." Keanu's response came with a smile that had nothing to do with his Hollywood career and everything to do with genuine understanding. "It's not charity, sir. Consider it an investment in something priceless, a story worth preserving." He turned to address the crowd again, his voice taking on a tone that commanded attention without demanding it. "You know, I've spent a lot of my life telling stories on screen, but the best stories, the ones that really matter, are the ones people live. They're about first loves and new beginnings, about sacrifices made and promises kept." His hand rested on the Bel Air's hood. "This car isn't just metal and chrome. It's a chapter in someone's life story." The Italian suit wasn't ready to concede. He stepped forward, his expensive shoes clicking on the polished floor. 200,000, he announced, a hint of challenge in his voice. "These cars are meant to be preserved, not—" 250,000, Keanu countered smoothly, not even letting him finish. "And I still maintain my condition." His eyes met Mitchell's. "The car goes home with the man who gave it its story." The auctioneer looked between them, confusion warring with protocol on his face. This wasn't how these events were supposed to go. The crowd had grown larger, more phones appearing to record the scene. Someone in the back was already typing furiously on their phone, no doubt sharing the unfolding drama on social media. "Mr. Reeves," the auctioneer began carefully, "while we appreciate your unique perspective, this is still a legitimate auction. Any winning bid must—" 300,000, Keanu stated firmly. "Final offer. And I'll add another 50,000 to be donated to veteran services in Sergeant Mitchell's name." The room erupted in murmurs. The Italian suit's face had gone from red to white, the realization dawning that he was on the wrong side of a moment that would likely go viral before the auction even ended. Several of the wealthy collectors who had been eyeing the Bel Air were now looking anywhere but at the confrontation, their own reflections in the classic car's gleaming surfaces suddenly uncomfortable to meet. Sergeant Mitchell stepped forward, his military bearing in full evidence despite the emotion in his voice. "Son," he addressed Keanu, "you don't need to do this. The car, she meant something to me, yes. But what you're offering—" Keanu's response was to reach into his jacket and pull out his checkbook. The gesture was deliberate, public, and carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Every classic car here has a price tag," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But only this one has a love story. Only this one carried a young couple's dreams. Only this one brought a newborn baby home." He started writing, each movement precise and determined. You can't put a price on memories, but you can make sure they end up where they belong. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that sounded more like surrender than authority. "Sold," he announced, protocol finally giving way to the inevitable, "to Mr. Reeves, with the noted condition." Around them, phones captured the moment. A Hollywood star rewrote the rules of value at an elite auction. But Keanu's attention was solely on the veteran, whose hands were shaking as he reached out to touch his car's familiar curves one more time, this time as its owner again. The auction house hummed with a new kind of energy as Sergeant Mitchell sat behind the wheel of his Bel Air for the first time in decades. His hands found their familiar places on the steering wheel, muscle memory untouched by time. Keanu stood nearby, deflecting attention with the practiced ease of someone used to being in the spotlight, but never quite comfortable with it. The Italian suit had disappeared into the crowd, his expensive shoes carrying him away from what was already becoming a social media phenomenon. Phones continued to record as the veteran turned the key, and the engine roared to life with a sound that spoke of restored power, but carried echoes of countless summer drives and precious memories. "The dent," Mitchell said suddenly, his voice catching. "They really did fix everything." His hand rested on the rear quarter panel, now smooth and perfect. Keanu smiled, pulling out his phone. I know a restoration shop that specializes in period-correct customization. How about we put that dent back exactly where it belongs? By evening, the video had gone viral. Kindness, Keanu, and Bel Air story were trending across platforms, with millions sharing the moment when Hollywood royalty reminded the wealthy elite about the true meaning of value. Classic car forums exploded with discussions about preservation versus history, about the souls of machines and the stories they carried. The auction house released a carefully worded statement about their commitment to preserving automotive history in all its forms. Their PR team worked overtime as journalists began calling about other stories, other veterans, other collectors, other cars with histories erased in the name of restoration. But in a small garage across town, none of that mattered. Sergeant Mitchell and Keanu spent hours with the car, the veteran sharing stories about each scratch and ding that had been erased, each modification he'd made for his growing family. The actor listened intently, asking questions that showed he understood, really understood, how machines could become part of the family. Late that night, as the social media storm continued to grow, Mitchell sat in his restored living room, looking through old photographs. His daughter had already called twice, crying happy tears about the video she'd seen. His granddaughter was coming over tomorrow to hear all the stories about the car she'd only known from family legends. On his coffee table lay Keanu's business card with a handwritten note. Some things get more valuable with every scratch and dent. They're not just possessions. They're chapters of our lives. Next to it was a schedule for the restoration shop, where they would carefully, lovingly return the Bel Air to its true form, not factory perfect, but perfectly memory-laden. Outside, the Bel Air sat in his driveway, its chrome catching the streetlights just like it had all those years ago. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of bringing back every precious imperfection, every earned mark of its history. But tonight, it was enough that it was home, its story preserved not in spite of its scars, but because of them.